Hi everyone, and welcome to the Dawn Jarvis Show. This is the podcast where we talk to busy leaders and professionals and business owners about who they are, what they do, and why they do it. We also talk about how they manage to stay focused, positive, and productive, and to maintain their own health and well-being. Today's guest is Schiff, Dr. Tom Schiff, and we are going to be talking about how white men can be allies for social justice. We are going to learn why white men have a critical role to play in working for social justice, and how white men have so much to gain by working in that critical role for social justice. I met Tom we were both guests on a diversity and inclusion panel in the States for an organisation, and we stayed in touch, and he's a fascinating guy to talk to. Dr. Tom Schiff has over 35 years experience as a consultant educator with organisations ranging from small local nonprofits to Fortune 500 companies. He has a particular expertise working with men and boys on issues of health, leadership, violence, race and racism, sexual harassment, sexism and homophobia. Hi, Tom. It's so good to see you, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Am I, Dawn? Nice to see you as well.
So the first thing I want to ask you is, how did you get to be working in social justice, in racism, around diversity and inclusion? And it seems odd to say, but I'm going to say it, as a white man, how did you get to be where you are today?
It's okay to say it that way. Well, it's interesting. I think I actually believe that part of how I got here has to do with my heritage and my life. I mean, my mom, I grew up with a feminist mom. And so I was hearing about gender all my life and thinking about it and dealing with it, whether I wanted to or not. I think when you're somebody who's in a privileged position, it can often be very challenging to have to look at that. And I've had to do that since pretty young. So I think, and then another part of that is I come from a family of Holocaust survivors. My father was actually born in Germany, in Berlin, and they left in Germany in 1936 when he was 7. They were fortunate enough mostly to get out. Some of the family did not. And so then and then some of the family ended up in South America. My dad's family ended up in New York in 1938. When other family members tried to leave, the borders were closed because God forbid that we would actually try to take care of immigrants that were in need. We're going to get political apparently. So, and and then a bunch of them ended up back in the States. And, all my life I heard things about, never again, that it's really important for us to speak up and speak out, and not just for our people, but for all people. Right. And so I think that's a piece of it as well. When I started working, when I graduated from college, my degree was in education. And social studies, history. I didn't really go that direction, but I ended up working with kids who had been abused and taken out of their homes, and began to see really who was being regulated. In other words, how class and race fit into who was in the system and who wasn't in the system. At a certain point, I started working in an organization that worked with men who had been abusive. That was one of the things that we did. And the same sort of thing, if you were white and middle class, you could go into a program, have counseling, so forth. If you were a man of color, you were more likely to end up going to jail. So just continuing to see those disparities, I think.
Yeah, you said a few things there, and we've talked before, and so I guess the first thing I want to draw out is your Jewish heritage, the impact of the Holocaust, having to coming from being a child of an immigrant, I guess, and as I am in the UK, and how that impacts on the way you see the world. and also I guess working with men, isn't it, around you know, I'm a woman, as you know, and it's a different perspective, I guess, working with men as a man, but you noticing who, as you said, who was regulated, what the impacts of abuse and the way we treat people who are abused and have been abused, I guess, and that must bring a lot to your work as well. And it's and I'm a nurse. I work with people who when I was nursing clinically, who were unwell, and knew that where they came from, and definitely from my own heritage, which is from the Caribbean, how that impacted on health and wellness. But I suppose it's, if you go from a social justice point of view, knowing where people come from is really important. Would you say, Tom?
I would say so. I think it's important to understand your own heritage. It's important to understand where other people come from, to understand that um, folks have a different experience of the world than you do, than we each do, right? And so as a white man living in the world that I live in, knowing that white women, all BIPOC folks, and I'm also cisgender and heterosexual. So, folks who are transgender, folks who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, are maybe having a very different experience of what it's like to be in the world. I have a relative sense of safety.
Yeah.
One of the ways I think about it is, so I live in Western Massachusetts, and I live in the woods, and we have this beautiful tract of land behind our property, 25 square miles of town land, lots of trails back there. It's
Lovely.
quite beautiful. Well, next time you're in Western Massachusetts, come visit. We'll go for
I
a walk.
will.
But and uh, my wife will take our dog out for a walk every morning. It's part of her way she takes care of herself, right? She'll get up the first thing in the morning. She'll go for about a 30 to 45-minute walk with the dog. And when I go out there, I don't think twice about my safety.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the privilege that I have, of being white, being male, being relatively big also, I think. And she has told me that she thinks about every single time. What would she do if? What would she do if? Because our dog would just go up and lick the person. So, I probably shouldn't say it publicly because, but and that's energy that she expends that I don't have to.
Yeah.
And it's not just an individual thing. I know that it's not like she's the only woman in the world who expends that energy, right?
Yeah.
And so also I know that as a white person, there's things that I don't expend energy on that my friends and colleagues and just people I don't even know, people of color, have to expend on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was having a chat with some Black diversity and inclusion trainers yesterday, and they were talking about their experiences working in mainly white organizations, and how it feels to both do the training and also a perspective, or what they were hearing about the perspective of the clients, of the people who were receiving the training, and how they were questioning I guess the validity of the training and why it was necessary. And there were some comments around, I don't see colour, it's not a problem here, that sort of thing, which was quite difficult sort of like to navigate as Black women. I've had similar experiences, but what the we're now talking to were from the States. So my experiences have been a slightly different. And I was saying, when you're doing that training as a white man, how do people take that training differently? Do you think it's a different experience? I know that you train both by yourself, but and also with co-trainers and co-facilitators. How is that? So
A great question. I mean, it's fascinating to me because I do work with, I regularly will have colleagues that I work with often women of color, sometimes men of color. And and particularly if we're focusing around race. And I think that, um, yeah, it's interesting to hear to see the way that folks will relate to me versus how they might relate to one of my colleagues. Sometimes, honestly, there's times that I feel like I get dismissed. Um, but more often, I feel like it's the experience of my BIPOC colleagues, and also the client's colleagues and coworkers, that get dismissed. It's like people want numbers. Tell us about the numbers. Why is this
Yeah.
important?
Yeah.
Rather than, can you listen to the people who are in your organization
Yeah.
telling you this is
Yeah.
what's happening? You know,
Yeah.
like, why would you question? I don't understand why somebody thinks it's okay to question somebody else's experience. Well, that's not what's happening. I mean, that's about power, and that's about someone who's trying to impose their worldview on somebody else, rather than understanding that we all have our own worldviews. And
Yes.
my worldview is valid. I mean, I'm not saying they're all equivalent. I'm saying, but mine is valid. That person's is valid. Yours is valid, so forth. Right.
Yeah.
So that's one piece. I think is how do we really engage with each other, and listen to each other and believe each other and have dialogue about it. This piece about not seeing color, um, I understand when white folks say that, what they're trying to say. What they're trying to say is, I'm really working hard to be a good human being and to be a good ally and so forth, and treat everybody the same, which is garbage. You can't treat everybody the same. Anybody anybody who has kids, has multiple children, know that you cannot treat everybody the same.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, as you know,
Yes,
right?
I do.
Right. So,
Yes, I do.
and also, when you say I don't see color, it means you're also saying to the person, I don't see all of you.
Yeah.
I'm not wanting to see all of you. I'm not willing to see all of you. I'm not willing to understand that the color of your skin has an impact on your experience in this organization, in this community, in this world,
Yeah.
right? Depending on where you are, it's going to have a different impact on you.
Yeah. It's I find it fascinating in as a how do you change cultures? How do you change people's perspectives? And I think it's the challenges around enabling people to see other people's experiences, to and as you said about, yeah, everyone's got their own view, which is all valid, but other people to see that, and not to be so, I suppose, egocentric about the view in the world, because it's what I hear when people say, I don't see color, so that's okay then, so yeah, and that's what's wrong with that statement. And to how to sort of say, how to draw that out and say, how do you feel that saying that feels to a person of color, or to a person of any difference around what, because it's negating the experience, isn't it? Even though that might not be the intention, that might be the impact. And then to have a conversation about that. When I was having a conversation yesterday, I was thinking about teaching styles, what you're trying to achieve, and what's the best way to achieve it. And although, those responses can be quite hurtful, I suppose once on a personal basis, for the trainer, it's around what are you there to do? And what's the purpose of the training, and how can you, sort of make that useful, and also manage your own health and well-being as well, because it does have an impact on both on the trainer, but I guess the people receiving the training to say that have their reasons for doing that too, but which just gets very complicated, and I don't have an answer for that. What do you think, Tom?
Well, there's so much that you just said there. I think that one of the pieces that's really interesting to think about when you talk about that very last piece about the health that it has on those of us who are facilitating the process. And as a white person, I'm just speaking for myself.
Yes.
What I've seen with my colleagues is that, of color, is that they it has a different impact on them.
Yeah.
Right. So I was working with an organization, and we were online, and my colleague is an African American woman, and we were working with this organization fairly high level at this point in the organization, and so there's 23 participants in this group, and um, all white, 21 white men and 2 white women. I mean, that's not an unusual thing, right? It was a 2-day. It's not, you know, and um, and it was a 2-day session. The beginning of the second day, we got into some stuff, and this one of the highest ranking white men in the group said some things that were pretty intense.
Yeah.
I don't need to get into what it was exactly because just to try to respect that company's whatever. And I could see the look on her face, and it was like this, we're online, and I could see the look on her face, and I knew that it was up to me to say something about it. And it had an impact on me because it was kind of like, the impact on me was, are you out of your mind? The impact on her, we talked about this later, the impact on her was more like, it was almost like a personal attack, even though it wasn't personal, and it was at the same time, right?
Yes. It felt personal, and it might
right.
not have been personal, but it felt personal.
Right. And I could also see the look on her face was, I'm not going there.
Yeah.
And so if I don't step in at that point to say something about it, then it just sits there, and then for her, and I don't know this for a fact because I'm not her, but for her, not only did she get the experience of hearing that person's statements, but she also then saw her co-facilitator not saying anything.
Yeah.
Right. And so does that mean that I don't get it? Does that mean I agree with him? Does that mean that, and then what's her level of trust going on with me? And I'm not perfect. I'm not saying I get it all the time. I mean, I think that's part of also being in those places of privileges. We miss a lot at times, right? And so that's part of the way it works. But, just using that as one example of, how the impact, and talk about health, and how the impact of that is very disparate. And we know that there's disparate health outcomes for different communities, right?
Absolutely. And that, I guess, that brings me on to, so you're an ally for your colleague in that particular situation, and we're talking about how white men can be allies for social justice, and I think sometimes people don't know what an ally is, and I think you described it quite well in the example that you gave, and is that you can realize the impact of something that's been done or said, and can be an advocate for speaking up about it, which also validates the experience of somebody who's been impacted by it. And that might not work as a sentence, but I guess that I haven't got a definition, and maybe I should have had it for the podcast, but I was thinking that you can be in a position where it's safe to actually reflect back around people, the difference, and the different treatment, and the different what's been said and what's been done, and to support and validate that lived experience. What do you think, Tom?
I think, well, for a definition, I would say that I think an ally, in the context of how we're naming it, I think is somebody who comes from a privileged identity, who is being supportive of somebody or some bodies who are not, who come from a more marginalized identity, right? That said, I also think that for me, it's important to remember that ally is not a noun. It's actually a verb.
I like that.
And so I actually often talk about allyship, right? Because and so it's about engaging in behavior. And so, it may not be that it may not be that I have to be the one who steps in
Yeah.
and steps forward. It might be that I'm there to stand right behind my colleague or whoever it might be, and support them. They don't necessarily, so people don't always need me to be the one who steps in, right? They can take care of themselves, but they might want some support in that. So it really depends, but it's really about behavior, I think, and how we do that. And so in the way that, because if we're, I make an analogy to, are you familiar with Ibram Kendi's work?
Not,
Uh,
but I'm happy to
Kendi wrote a
learn.
book called, this pretty big book in the States anyhow, about how to be an anti-racist.
Okay, cool.
And I may be misunderstanding or misquoting or whatever I'm doing here. So if I do, I apologize, Dr. Kendi. But it's my understanding that when he talks about being anti-racist, he's talking about, it's not like, again, it is not about an identity. It is about behavior. And as a white person trying to do this work, there's going to be times I mess up. Like, I'm not going to be perfect at it. I mean, not anybody's going to be perfect at it, but I'm talking about myself here, right? I'm not going to be perfect at it. I'm going to do things that are anti-racist, that are challenging racist systems, white supremacy, so forth. And there's going to be times that I collude with it without my knowledge, hopefully, because if I'm doing that, then it's really problematic. But if I'm doing it with my knowledge, but I think it's important to keep that in mind. The same thing is true about being an ally in any social justice arena.
Yeah.
That as I'm going to, there's going to be times where I'm going to nail it. I'm going to be so good at it.
Yeah.
People are going to stand up and cheer. No, nobody's going to do that, I hope. But there's going to be times where I'm going to miss the mark. I'm going to not say it right. I'm going to not even notice, right? I mean, that's part of this work is continuing to deepen our understanding so that the more we notice, the more we can have those conversations, right? And it plays out in some really significant ways, in some really subtle ways, and or smaller ways. One of those examples of a smaller way for me is, I know even with friends, I'll be having a conversation. I talk about race,
Yeah.
and I'll be talking with white friends about race, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah," and then change the subject
Yeah.
after 30 seconds, and I'll just be like, "You know what? I wasn't done with that conversation." Right. And I think it's actually okay. I mean, at least the people who are my friends,
Yeah.
get that, okay, oh, we're going to have this conversation, or I want to continue to have this conversation. He's not going to shame me, but it's about how do we continue to say it's okay to talk about this, right? That's a form of allyship. I'm not saying it's a huge form of allyship, but it's one form of it in a sense, because we have to keep talking about it and we have to keep acting on it. It's not just about talk.
Brilliant. I love that. And why do you think white men in particular have a critical role in sort of allyship for social justice?
Well, I can't speak for the entire world,
Okay.
but I do. I think in the context of places where whiteness and maleness, therefore the systems of white supremacy and patriarchy take precedence, and patriarchy is everywhere really. I think that as a white man, I have access to people that a lot of my colleagues don't. And when I say access, I mean even that I get seen as, oh, you're like me, and so I may listen to you, right? I think it's important that we speak up so that we're also giving, there's this whole, I think that there are folks in privileged groups of any group, but we're talking about white men right now. So I think there's plenty of white men who actually do believe and want to support social justice. And I think that oftentimes we have felt like it's not our place to say something. And there's been times where we've been told that.
Okay.
I mean, I think that was a very 1990s approach,
Okay.
at least in the States.
Yeah.
And maybe and I think it's important for us to listen also.
Yeah.
That's part of being an ally and being an allyship. So that's one piece. But I think more importantly, I think that we are in so many places of privilege and power that it's important for us to speak up. And we want to, but we don't necessarily know how. So when we see other white men speaking up, that's giving us some examples of how someone who is like me might be doing that. And part of that is not just about speaking up, it's also about listening, right? So I see another white man really listening with respect and intent, to a colleague of color, to a gay colleague of color, to, I keep going, right? And being able to model that is important, and also to model, even though it might not sound like I have it right now, to model humility, around this, and to model that I'm going to mess up at times, and so I also have to learn how to clean that up as best I can. By cleaning it up, meaning like apologizing with, not like I'm sorry you felt that way, but I'm sorry about my behavior, and just owning that. And I think that's part of why it's important too, because, and as I said, and look at the numbers of CEOs, look at the numbers of presidents of organizations and so forth, and look at when I say the numbers, look at the demographics, right? I mean, if it's mostly white men, and if you look at lots of organizations and you look at the layers of those, you see that's who's still in leadership. And so if we want to create change and we want to create inclusion, and justice, then we have to be part of that process. Otherwise, power won't change.
I think that's so true, and I really love the way that you explained it about listening and advocating and being humble as well. I really, really like that. But I want to say, what are the benefits of doing it? What's to be gained? And that's not because people do things because they want kudos, or they want glory around that, but there are advantages, aren't there? What would you say? And there's things. And so if you were talking to an organization, or if I was talking to an organization, I would sort of like talk about the business benefits, the personal benefits, the financial benefits, and and the moral benefits as well. And what do you see that what white men have to gain by working as allies for social justice?
Great question. I think there's a number of things that we have to gain. I think on a very personal level, we gain, how do I want to put this? We gain an ability to be more human. Okay, so I mean, and I know that sounds very glossy, and from a business perspective, you're like, whatever. But so I'm talking about on a personal level, we gain that, right? To be able to hold on to privilege. One of the things that we have to do is we have to be separate from other people. We have to keep a distance, and we have to also separate from ourselves as well, from our bodies, from our emotions, from our own thought process, because if we don't, we have to do that in order to maintain that level, right? Because otherwise we see the inhumanity of what's going on. Right? When we start to see that, then we also are able to be better touch with ourselves. We're able to have a better understanding of ourselves. We're going to have better health outcomes. I'm in the States, so I'm going to use US numbers, but I don't know what it's like in Britain. You call it Britain or England, or I don't want to insult anybody here.
No, you're not, trust me. Trust me.
All right. So white men have the highest rates of addiction and suicide and other health issues. Men in general have the much worse health outcomes for all of like the major causes of death. Like the top 15, we have worse outcomes on all of those things. And so part of that is, are we is part of that about how we live, about how we numb ourselves, about how, in order to be able to maintain this life, right? So I mean, that's part of it, right? That's on a personal level. So, and then when you talk about it on an organizational level, for us to be social justice advocates means our organizations are going to be that much more efficient, effective, productive, places of joy to work in. You know, I mean, for so many years, white men have only had to compete against other white men,
Yeah.
right? And so that's, so now you hear all this pushback around, well, gosh, this person is getting the jobs. Like, be excellent and you'll get the job. You know, but you were able to be mediocre and still really move up for so many years,
Yeah.
right? I don't know
Definitely.
if I answered your question there,
You
Dawn.
did answer my question. You talked about from a sort of like from a personal level and the benefits that will happen for you personally in your own health and well-being. And you also talked about it as an organizational level, that the benefits of like it being a good place to work, and people will say it's a good place to work. They'll say and they'll feed that back. And I think, to reflect the culture of an organization, that's why people stay. There'll be, people quantify that work in sort of like less absenteeism, more people recommending it as a good place to say, and retaining employees as well. So I think, yeah, you definitely did answer the question, and the numbers around health and addiction and sort of like the causes of death are the same, across sort of the developed world. Really, it's sort of like a North Hemisphere um, disease,
Yes.
really around that, and I think humanizing it and sort of like working towards a better world, if for want of a better expression, is something that we all should be striving for, and it is of a benefit. So
Let me just add to it, and maybe I said this already, and you said it really well too, but the idea of, I mean, so for the folks who need those quantitative things,
yeah,
right, there are plenty of studies out there about organizations that are more diverse and more inclusive, also being more profitable,
absolutely.
right? Right. I mean, and attracting a broader talent range, right? Because talent exists in all communities
Yeah,
equally, and so the fact that you're creating those organizations, like you said, like people want to work there, they want to stay there, and so forth, and word gets out that, hey, this is a good place for people to work, and the up and coming generation, this is an important piece for them,
yeah.
right? And so if we want to really continue to be relevant, and we want to continue to be productive and profitable, if that's the kind of organization we're talking about, then we have to do this. We have to.
Definitely. So in the work that you do, you work with organisations, you work with men, you work with people from a range of areas, and it sounds quite emotive work. It sounds hard work. How do you manage to stay focused and positive and productive, and sort of like keep going? Because sometimes when you're talking about these sort of concepts and how things should be as opposed to how they are, it can get a bit demoralizing. Going back to the conversation I had with my friends, is that sometimes you think, oh no, so how do you keep yourself going and focused?
Well, it can be hard work, but it can also be really joyous work. And I often see that my role in the world is actually bringing joy to people. Okay, I mean, I know that not everybody goes, "Oh, here comes the guy from the joy," the guy brings the joy,
Well,
or
that'd be great.
wouldn't that be lovely?
Yes.
But I think that's important, right? I think it's important to remember that that social justice is really about partly about spreading joy, right? Because if we can have justice, then more people will be able to embrace joy in a different way, right? Um, and that might sound glossy, but I actually think that's what it's true, and that doesn't mean it's not also about all those other things we talked about, but I think that's a part of it. So I think part of it's about a mindset, and it doesn't mean this doesn't mean that I'm not like halfway through a 4-day session sometimes going, oh my God, this is so hard, and that person is such a jerk, and blah 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 blah. And then I have to pull back and say, well, wait a minute, are they a jerk? It's like your lights just changed
My
there.
lights just went out, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to do anything about it because we're in the middle of a podcast.
All right. Um, and and then I have to like also, okay, why is that person? Why do I think that person's being a jerk, and how am I going to continue to connect with that person? Right? Because I think that's a part of it. Is this is also about connection. Um, and the question, I think your question, if I remember, because I'm just blabbing away here, is also about self-care.
Yeah. How do you care for yourself though, Tom?
Well, I think that, part of it is, um, like I said, having whatever the perspective is, having colleagues that I really love to work with,
Yeah.
but also making sure I get outside and get fresh air. I mean, for me, that's actually an article. It was in the Washington Post or New York Times this past week about um, a, something in the Netherlands where they talk about being out in the wind.
Yeah.
Uh,
I love that. That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah, and absolutely, I love it too. Like I'm outside. I mean, it was the other day. It was, I think, 10 degrees Fahrenheit here, which is, I don't know what that is Celsius, because in the U.S. we don't believe in things that are
Yeah.
visible by.
Yes.
We're
Yeah.
too easy to figure that out, right?
Yeah.
But that's well below zero. I know
Yeah.
that. Um, and and I could do the math. I remember there's some formula I learned in high school, but
Tell me about it.
it's minus 32 plus 5 ninths or something. I can't remember. Anyhow, so um, and it was great. I mean, I dressed warmly enough, and I go out there, and I just take a nice hike in the woods with my dog, not worried about anything coming along. I mean, I worry that maybe I might, fall and hurt myself and not be able to and freeze to death. That's a different kind of fear, you
Yeah.
know. Um, but so things like that, trying to move my body, trying to stretch, trying to exercise. In the summertime, I like to garden. You know,
Yeah. That sounds
uh,
good. It
yeah, I
sounds
mean, like
good.
like finding things that again bring you joy or happiness, or that you can engage both in the body and the mind as well. Are critical. I think one of the things that's been challenging for a lot of us over the last couple of years is connecting with other people.
Yeah, definitely.
And
Definitely.
I mean, I have one of my best friends lives in the area, and we try to go for a walk in the woods once or twice a month. You know, and it was interesting when the pandemic first was going on. We were like walking in the woods and having to stay 6 feet apart from each other, and
I know.
that kind of thing. And now that we've both been vaccinated and boosted, and which doesn't mean we don't have any concerns, but we also feel like, we're outside, and it's probably a little bit easier. So I think that's part of it. I mean, I think that's part of just trying to find the places, trying to find that balance also, um, of
Definitely.
of living life in ways that that just bring rejuvenation.
Yeah, definitely. And you live in a nice place, and you make the most of your environment. You go out for a walk, and that's part of it. I think that is part of the, how I was on a live stream before we started recording this podcast, and we talked about similar things and the impact of the global pandemic, how that it's increased the need for connection, it's increased the need to be aware of how long you spend sitting down, how long you spend in front of a screen, how much sleep you get, that sort of thing. And that's, I think, and one of the reasons I asked the question is, I guess, that when people do hard jobs, or if they're have their own businesses, it's quite easy to forget um, how important it is to look after your own health and well-being, as well as trying to be a good person, and trying to have having a career or a business. And that's why I asked the question. So I really like your answers, because it's about connecting with yourself, connecting with nature, and connecting with people. So I love that, Tom.
I think in our culture, in the U.S. in particular, about it, because I don't know so much about where you are, but um, we often measure ourselves through productivity,
Yeah.
right? And that's even included in terms of like our leisure,
Yes.
right? what did I get done in my time off? I don't know. I stared at the wall. Maybe that was okay. Maybe that's what I needed to do, Um, or, I mean, it's not like I don't want to have to check off. And unfortunately, I understand that. I mean, it's also like it's my time off and I have to get the laundry done and I got to go food shopping and I got to do this and that and that. I mean, I understand all those things, right? That's part of it, but that's part of self-care. But also, if I didn't do those things, can I still feel okay about myself? Can I
Yeah.
still, because maybe I just needed to collapse on the couch and you know, watch Netflix for a while.
I really like that because, and again, it was something I said just now in the live stream that decide what you want and what you're okay with, what's good for you, and and it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be good enough and to be content with it. Because I sometimes think happiness and well-being is about being content with that you've done enough, and that's okay. And it doesn't have to be, oh, I did a 5 mile run. It has to be, it's like I did do some exercise, I did get outside, I did what I could do and I planned for it and I did what I could. And I think that's really important that people give themselves the grace, because most people I meet are working really, really hard to do the best they can. And so give yourself grace for doing that. So thank you for that, Tom. That's really, really good. Um, how, if people want to contact you, get in touch with you, learn more about the work that you do, how can people do that?
Well, they could find me on LinkedIn. It's Tom Schiff, Schiff.
Mhm.
They could reach me through my website, tomschiffconsulting.com, all one word. Um, and also, what we didn't talk about at all, and I'll just put a quick plug in, is I also am the director of a very small nonprofit called Fallacies,
Yeah.
and that's PHALLACIES.org. Um, and we are actually, and it's a men's health dialogue and theater program. And have moved online. So we can have people from all over the world join us, male identified folks who want to join into something like that. Would be love to have you join us. It'd be very, very cool.
It's about
Currently,
that, Tom. Tell me more about that. Because we
well,
didn't. Yeah.
fallacies is really a labor of love. It's something
Uh-huh.
that I created when I was working at the university and then brought it with me.
Uh-huh.
Um, it is what we do is we meet on a weekly basis, and so it's mostly younger men. I would love to have some older men join us as well, um, but because we started at the university, that was kind of the culture that was there, right? So our in the last since we went online, our age range has both increased and decreased. So we have some high school students as well as people who are in their 20s as part of the group. And we meet on a weekly basis for a couple hours. And in that time, we do dialogue. And we do a dialogue related to masculinity, um, intersecting identities, race, class, sexuality, so forth. We not all of this all at the same time, how that intersects with health. So we
Yes.
may be having a very specific, like we have had conversations about, as I said, race and sexuality and class and so on. But we've also had conversations about body image and about pornography and about alcohol use or substance use, so on and so on. We talk about relationships and violence prevention. So there may be, so in a given week, we will have a topic that we're talking about and kind of try to dive into that. And sometimes the topics may last more than 1 week. And then out of that, we historically, what we've done is we've written performance pieces that are anywhere from 3 to 7 minutes. Some of those are recorded on our website. And we are currently, because we are now online, thinking more about it in terms of, oh, and I should say, and we would perform live. So we would take those 3 to 7 minute ones and run enough of them together that we'd have like an hour-long show, perhaps, or 20 minutes, depending on where we were performing, right? Well, because we might be in a school and we'd be doing a school assembly, or we might be going to a college and doing a larger thing, or a conference, or so depending on what the time frame is. And that was always a lot of fun. And
Was it? I want to come, but I'm not a man.
We might make you. We might, we're trying to think about whether that's still relevant for us to be doing it that way.
Yeah.
But now what we're trying to do is do some of the same pieces, not the same pieces, but some different, same style, and maybe some of the same pieces, and turn them into recorded pieces that are made specifically for an online environment. So creating resources. So that's why it would be great to have more folks involved in the process. We've got a couple, we haven't really put them online yet. We're still trying to figure out how we're doing this yet. And obviously we're going to need to make shorter pieces than 3 to 7 minutes, because online that's an eternity. So.
Yeah. And also you could put it on YouTube and things like that as well, sort of like, for it just widens the audience, because we are in this global world now, aren't we, where we can touch, that we're friends we've never met, and that, and you can reach so many people. I really like how you've described your non-profit. It's called Fallacies, isn't it? And a link to that and everything, and Tom's website and his LinkedIn account will be in the show notes. So Tom, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, reflections, and you've made me think a lot. And it's been absolutely fantastic to have you here. We usually end the show with sort of like asking our guests to give sort of one final tip nugget that they want to share, so that our listeners or our viewers can take away with them. Is there anything that you would like to say?
I'd known that was something I was supposed to think about. I think this may sound a little glossy, but I think it's really important that we try to engage with each other from a place of love as much as possible. And I might not love everything that somebody does, but if I can embrace that and that their humanity, I think that's really a critical piece for us to think about. How do we do that? And how do we then translate that into our systems as well?
I really like that, because it's not only thinking about it, and although that's really important, and it's really important to process it, it's like, what are you going to do with it? What's going to be different when you have sort of processed that, and what difference it's going to make in the world. I love that. Thank you so much, Tom. It's been an absolute pleasure. And that's it for the Dawn Jarvis show today. Thank you so much for listening or viewing. If you liked what you've heard, please do comment and share and subscribe to the channel. That'd be really great. And we'll see you soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.